Right now, countless empaths are standing at a crossroads in their lives, and most of them do not even realize it. From the outside, it can look like everything is falling apart. Relationships feel heavier than ever. Trust becomes harder to give. The energy that once seemed endless suddenly feels drained. The desire to keep rescuing, fixing, and carrying everyone else begins to fade. For many people, this feels like the beginning of a loss. But beneath the surface, another story is unfolding. A story that few people talk about. A story that psychology is only beginning to understand more deeply. The very experiences that make an empath feel broken can become the same experiences that rebuild them into someone stronger, wiser, and more powerful than they have ever been before. What looks like an ending is often the start of a remarkable transformation. For years, empaths give pieces of themselves away without noticing. They listen when nobody listens to them. They support people who rarely return the same care. They absorb emotional burdens that were never theirs to carry. Over time, this creates an invisible weight, a weight that grows quietly until one day it becomes impossible to ignore. Then comes a stage that many empaths mistake for failure. Motivation disappears. Patience runs thin. Certain relationships no longer feel right. The need for solitude becomes stronger. Yet hidden inside this difficult season is a truth that most people never see. Major personal growth often begins when old emotional patterns stop working. The habits that once kept an empath accepted, needed, or valued suddenly lose their power. That is when real change begins. In this video, you will discover why some of the hardest moments in an empath's life are actually signs of a coming breakthrough. You will learn why emotional exhaustion is not always a weakness. You will uncover the surprising reason many empaths experience their greatest growth after periods of disappointment, rejection, or loneliness. We will explore the hidden shifts taking place beneath the surface, the psychological changes that occur when an empath stops living for everyone else and starts reconnecting with themselves. Most importantly, you will learn why the comeback many empaths are waiting for does not arrive from external validation, new relationships, or perfect circumstances. It begins from a powerful internal transformation that changes the way they see themselves and the world around them. As this journey unfolds, several lesser-known truths will emerge. Truths that explain why certain people leave an empath's life right before a major breakthrough. Why periods of isolation often appear before significant personal growth. Why the qualities that once seemed like weaknesses can become their greatest strengths. And why some of the most successful personal transformations happen quietly, long before anyone else notices them. Each step builds toward a deeper understanding of what is really happening when an empath reaches their lowest point, and why that point may actually be preparing them for their highest rise. Stay with us until the end, because the final lesson may completely change the way you view your current struggles. What feels like a setback today could be preparing you for the biggest comeback of your life. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy exploring psychology, human behavior, emotional intelligence, and the hidden patterns that shape our lives, make sure to subscribe and join our growing community. Now, let's begin. A powerful shift begins long before an empath recognizes it. It does not arrive with celebration. It does not announce itself with confidence or certainty. In fact, it often arrives disguised as exhaustion. The habits that once felt natural start feeling heavy. The role they have played for years suddenly becomes difficult to maintain. The empath who once answered every call, solved every problem, and carried everyone else's emotions begins to feel an unfamiliar resistance. At first, they may blame themselves. They may wonder why they are becoming distant, why they no longer have endless patience, why they feel less willing to sacrifice their own needs. Yet what is really happening goes much deeper. The old version of the empath is beginning to fade away, not because they are becoming cold or selfish, not because they no longer care, but because a part of them is finally realizing that the way they have been living cannot continue forever. For many empaths, people-pleasing starts so early that it feels like part of their personality. They learn to read the emotions of others before they learn to understand their own. They become experts at sensing tension, disappointment, sadness, and frustration. Without realizing it, they begin adjusting themselves to keep everyone comfortable. They say yes when they want to say no. They stay silent when they want to speak. They ignore their own feelings to avoid upsetting someone else. Over time, this pattern becomes automatic. The approval of others starts to feel connected to safety. Being liked feels necessary. Being needed feels important. The empath becomes the dependable person everyone turns to. And while that role may bring appreciation, it often comes at a hidden cost. As the years pass, many empaths become trapped in a cycle of overgiving. They give time they do not have. They give energy they cannot afford to lose. They give understanding to people who rarely offer the same understanding in return. They become the emotional support system for friends, family members, coworkers, and partners. They listen to endless problems. They provide endless encouragement. They make endless sacrifices. Yet somewhere along the way, a painful imbalance begins to grow. The more they give, the less connected they feel to themselves. Their own dreams get postponed. Their own needs get ignored. Their own emotional wounds remain unhealed because they are too busy helping everyone else heal. One of the hardest truths an empath eventually faces is that some people become attached, not to who they are, but to what they provide. Some relationships survive because the empath keeps giving. Some connections remain strong because the empath keeps forgiving. Some bonds continue because the empath continues carrying responsibilities that do not belong to them. This realization can be deeply painful. Nobody wants to believe that their kindness has been taken for granted. Nobody wants to accept that certain relationships depended on their self-sacrifice. Yet this awareness often marks the beginning of real transformation. At first, the empath may resist this truth. They may continue trying harder, giving more, explaining more, fixing more. They may believe that if they just love enough, care enough, or understand enough, everything will improve. But eventually reality becomes impossible to ignore. The same patterns keep repeating. The same disappointments keep returning. The same emotional exhaustion keeps growing. What once felt meaningful starts feeling draining. What once felt rewarding starts feeling empty. Slowly, the empath begins questioning beliefs they have carried for years. One of those beliefs is the idea that being needed means being loved. For a long time, the two may have felt identical. If people needed them, it meant they mattered. If people depended on them, it meant they were valuable. If people came to them with problems, it meant they were important. But genuine love and dependency are not the same thing. Genuine love respects boundaries. Genuine love values the person, not just the service they provide. Genuine love remains even when someone is no longer constantly giving. This distinction changes everything. When an empath begins separating love from obligation, their perspective starts changing. They notice how often they have ignored their own needs. They notice how often they have accepted less than they deserved. They notice how frequently they have prioritized the happiness of others while neglecting themselves. This awareness can feel uncomfortable because it forces them to confront years of habits. Yet it also creates freedom. For the first time, they begin asking a different question. Instead of asking how they can help everyone else, they begin asking what they need. That question may seem simple, but for many empaths it feels revolutionary. They have spent so much time focused outward that looking inward feels unfamiliar. They may not even know what they want anymore. They may struggle to identify their own needs because they have spent years ignoring them. Yet every step towards self-awareness weakens the grip of the old version they have outgrown. As this transformation continues, another major shift begins to take place. The empath starts caring less about external validation. This process rarely happens overnight. In fact, it often develops through disappointment. For years, many empaths secretly wait for certain moments. They wait for the apology that never comes. They wait for recognition from people who never acknowledge their sacrifices. They wait for understanding from people who never truly listen. Deep down, they hope that one day someone will finally see everything they have done and appreciate it fully. This hope can become a hidden source of suffering. Every act of kindness carries an unspoken expectation. Every sacrifice carries a quiet desire for acknowledgement. Every effort contains a wish to be understood. When those expectations go unmet, frustration grows, resentment builds, heartbreak follows. The empath may wonder why people do not seem to appreciate everything they have given. Eventually, however, a powerful realization emerges. Not everyone will understand. Not everyone will appreciate. Not everyone will apologize. Some people will never recognize the pain they caused. Some people will never admit their mistakes. Some people will continue living their lives without offering the closure the empath hoped to receive. For a long time, this reality feels unfair. But then something unexpected happens. The empath stops waiting. They stop looking toward others for permission to heal. They stop depending on apologies to move forward. They stop requiring recognition to validate their worth. Instead, they begin finding that validation within themselves. This shift changes the emotional landscape completely. The need for approval starts losing its power. The need to be understood by everyone begins fading. The need for constant reassurance becomes less important. The empath starts realizing that their value does not depend on whether someone else sees it. Their worth does not increase when they receive praise. Their worth does not decrease when they face rejection. This understanding creates a sense of freedom that many empaths have never experienced before. They become less controlled by the opinions of others, less affected by criticism, less dependent on external approval. Decisions become easier because they are no longer filtered through the question of whether everyone will agree. Authenticity becomes stronger because they no longer feel compelled to constantly prove themselves. One of the most empowering moments occurs when the empath truly understands a simple truth. The day you stop chasing validation is the day your power returns. Power returns because attention is no longer focused on convincing others. Power returns because energy is no longer wasted seeking approval. Power returns because self-worth becomes internal rather than external. Yet reclaiming this power introduces a new challenge. It requires action. It requires choices. It requires the courage to protect what has finally been rediscovered. This is where many empaths face one of the most difficult lessons of their entire journey. They must learn to set boundaries. For some people, boundaries seem natural. For many empaths, boundaries feel uncomfortable. Saying no creates guilt. Declining requests creates anxiety. Prioritizing personal needs creates fear. They worry about disappointing others. They worry about appearing selfish. They worry about being misunderstood. These fears can be incredibly strong because the empath has often built their identity around helping and supporting others. As a result, boundaries may feel like a betrayal of who they are. Yet the truth is exactly the opposite. Boundaries do not destroy compassion. Boundaries protect compassion. Without them, kindness becomes exhaustion. Generosity becomes depletion. Support becomes self-neglect. The empath slowly begins learning that protecting their emotional energy is not selfish. It is necessary. They start recognizing situations that drain them, relationships that demand too much, conversations that leave them emotionally exhausted, patterns that repeatedly create pain. Instead of automatically tolerating these experiences, they begin responding differently. Sometimes this means saying no without providing a long explanation. Sometimes it means walking away from unhealthy dynamics. Sometimes it means choosing rest instead of responsibility. Sometimes it means allowing others to solve their own problems. These actions may feel uncomfortable at first, but each boundary strengthens a new sense of self-respect. Many empaths discover that the people who truly care about them adapt to these changes. Healthy relationships become stronger because they are based on mutual respect rather than endless sacrifice. At the same time, other relationships begin showing cracks. People who benefited from the empath's lack of boundaries may resist the change. They may become frustrated. They may become critical. They may accuse the empath of changing. In many ways, they are right. The empath is changing. The version that constantly ignored personal needs is disappearing. The version that accepted imbalance without question is fading away. The version that believed self-sacrifice was the price of love is being replaced. This stage can feel lonely because not everyone celebrates growth. Some people prefer the version of you that required less accountability. Some people prefer the version of you that always said yes. Some people prefer the version of you that tolerated behavior you should never have accepted. Their disappointment may create guilt, but guilt is not always a sign that you are doing something wrong. Sometimes it is simply a sign that you are breaking an old pattern. As the empath continues strengthening boundaries, confidence grows in unexpected ways. Decisions become clearer. Relationships become more honest. Emotional energy becomes more stable. Life starts feeling less reactive and more intentional. They no longer feel responsible for everyone's happiness. They no longer feel obligated to rescue everyone they encounter. They begin understanding that compassion does not require self-destruction. This understanding opens the door to the most profound transformation yet. A transformation that reaches deeper than behavior, deeper than habits, and deeper than relationships. Because once an empath stops abandoning themselves, stops chasing validation, and starts protecting their energy, they become ready for the biggest shift of all. There comes a stage in every empath's journey when pain stops being just pain. Until that moment arrives, emotional wounds often feel confusing, unfair, and deeply personal. Betrayal feels like proof that trust was a mistake. Rejection feels like proof that they were not enough. Heartbreak feels like proof that love was wasted. Being misunderstood feels like proof that nobody truly sees who they are. These experiences can leave scars that last for years. Many empaths carry these scars quietly. They continue functioning. They continue helping others. They continue smiling when necessary. Yet beneath the surface, certain memories remain alive. Certain disappointments refuse to disappear. Certain questions keep repeating inside their minds. Why did this happen? Why was loyalty met with betrayal? Why was kindness met with indifference? Why was love met with rejection? Why did people fail to appreciate what was given so freely? For a long time, these questions dominate the empath's thinking. They replay conversations. They revisit old situations. They search for explanations. They analyze every detail. Because empaths naturally seek understanding, they often believe that finding the perfect answer will finally bring peace. Yet the more they search, the more exhausted they become. Some answers never arrive. Some people never explain themselves. Some wounds never receive closure from the people who caused them. This is where an important shift begins. It is a shift that changes the direction of an empath's entire life. Gradually, the question changes. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" they begin asking, "What is this teaching me?" At first, this may seem like a small difference, but in reality, it changes everything. The first question keeps attention focused on the past. The second question points toward growth. The first question searches for blame. The second question searches for wisdom. The first question keeps the wound open. The second question begins the healing process. When an empath starts looking for lessons instead of explanations, painful experiences take on a new meaning. Betrayal no longer exists only as a source of suffering. It becomes a teacher. It reveals who was genuine and who was not. It exposes hidden intentions. It shows where trust was given too freely. It teaches discernment. The pain remains real, but now it serves a purpose. Instead of simply creating hurt, it creates awareness. The same thing happens with rejection. Few experiences feel more personal than being rejected. Many empaths spend years believing that rejection reflects their worth. They assume they were not enough, not attractive enough, not valuable enough, not lovable enough. Yet over time, many discover a different truth. Rejection often redirects people toward places they were meant to be. Some doors close because they do not belong in our future. Some opportunities disappear because they are not aligned with our growth. Some relationships end because they cannot support the person we are becoming. What once felt like punishment slowly reveals itself as protection. Heartbreak creates another layer of wisdom. During heartbreak, the empath often feels as though a part of their world has collapsed. They grieve not only what happened, but also what could have been. They grieve future plans, future dreams, future possibilities. Yet heartbreak frequently becomes one of life's most powerful teachers. It forces people to see themselves more clearly. It reveals emotional patterns that were previously hidden. It exposes fears that were controlling decisions. It shines light on wounds that still need healing. Many empaths discover more about themselves through heartbreak than through years of comfort. Being misunderstood creates its own unique form of pain. Empaths spend much of their lives trying to understand others. Because of this, they naturally hope for the same understanding in return. They want people to see their intentions, their sacrifices, their struggles, their hearts. Yet there are moments when they realize that some people will never fully understand them. Some people will judge them based on assumptions. Some people will misunderstand their silence, their boundaries, their choices, their growth. This realization can feel lonely at first, but eventually it brings freedom. The empath stops trying to explain themselves to everyone. They stop exhausting themselves proving who they are. They begin accepting that understanding from others is valuable, but it is not necessary for self-worth. This is when the wound starts becoming a lesson. The lesson starts becoming strength. The strength starts becoming transformation. The transformation does not happen all at once. It develops slowly through countless small moments. Every disappointment teaches resilience. Every setback teaches patience. Every painful experience teaches awareness. The empath becomes stronger, not because life becomes easier, but because they learn how to carry difficulty differently. They stop seeing themselves as victims of every circumstance. They start seeing themselves as students of every experience. One of the most remarkable things about this stage is how differently the empath begins responding to challenges. Situations that once caused emotional collapse now create reflection. Situations that once triggered panic now create insight. Situations that once led to self-blame now lead to growth. The same pain still exists, but the relationship with pain changes completely. Many people never reach this level of transformation because they spend their entire lives running from discomfort. They avoid difficult truths. They avoid self-reflection. They avoid personal responsibility. Empaths, however, often develop extraordinary growth because they are willing to feel deeply. Although this sensitivity creates pain, it also creates wisdom. Their emotional depth becomes one of their greatest strengths. As this wisdom grows, another powerful change begins taking shape. The empath stops viewing themselves through the lens of fear. Fear once controlled countless decisions. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of disappointing others, fear of conflict, fear of being alone. Fear quietly influenced relationships, choices, and behaviors for years. Yet with every lesson learned, fear loses a little more control. This is where the comeback enters an entirely new phase. The empath begins trusting themselves again. For a long time, many empaths ignore their intuition. Deep inside, they sense when something feels wrong. They notice red flags. They recognize unhealthy patterns. They feel warning signs long before problems become obvious. Yet they often override those instincts. They give extra chances. They make excuses. They doubt their own judgment. They convince themselves that things will improve. As wisdom develops, this pattern starts changing. The empath becomes more willing to trust what they feel. They stop dismissing their intuition. They stop ignoring inner signals. They stop betraying their own instincts in order to make other people comfortable. This trust creates confidence, not loud confidence, not arrogant confidence, quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing yourself deeply. At the same time, peace becomes more valuable than approval. Earlier in life, approval may have been one of the highest priorities. Being liked felt important. Being accepted felt necessary. Being appreciated felt essential. But after enough lessons, priorities begin shifting. The empath realizes that approval can disappear at any moment. People change their opinions, expectations change, relationships change. Chasing approval becomes an endless game. Peace, however, is different. Peace creates stability. Peace creates clarity. Peace creates emotional freedom. The empath starts choosing environments that support peace, relationships that support peace, habits that support peace. They stop volunteering for unnecessary chaos. They stop participating in drama that drains their energy. They stop feeling responsible for managing everyone's emotions. This often leads to difficult decisions. Some relationships can no longer continue the way they once did. Some friendships become unhealthy. Some partnerships become one-sided. Some family dynamics become emotionally damaging. In the past, the empath may have remained in these situations far longer than necessary. They may have stayed because they felt guilty. They may have stayed because they hoped people would change. They may have stayed because leaving felt selfish. Now a different understanding emerges. Walking away is not always weakness. Walking away is not always failure. Walking away is not always giving up. Sometimes walking away is self-respect. Sometimes walking away is healing. Sometimes walking away is the most loving thing a person can do for themselves. This realization changes everything. The empath no longer measures success by how much they can endure. They no longer see suffering as proof of loyalty. They no longer believe that endless sacrifice is required for meaningful relationships. Instead, they begin prioritizing personal growth. This is one of the most important signs that a comeback is truly underway. Personal growth becomes more important than pleasing others. Healing becomes more important than maintaining appearances. Self-discovery becomes more important than external validation. The empath begins investing energy differently. They spend more time understanding themselves, more time developing emotionally, more time building healthy habits, more time creating a life aligned with their values. As this process continues, something extraordinary happens. The person staring back from the mirror starts feeling familiar again. Not because they have become someone entirely new, not because they have transformed into a completely different person, but because they have returned to parts of themselves that were buried for years. Many empaths spend so much time adapting to other people's expectations that they lose connection with who they truly are. They become who others need them to be, who others expect them to be, who others want them to be. The comeback changes that. The comeback is not about creating a new identity. It is about recovering an authentic one. It is about rediscovering the confidence that existed before rejection created doubt. It is about rediscovering the peace that existed before fear created anxiety. It is about rediscovering the self-worth that existed before criticism created insecurity. It is about rediscovering the inner strength that existed before disappointment created hesitation. The comeback is not becoming someone new. It is returning to the person they were before fear took control. This version of the empath is different from what most people expect. They are still compassionate, but no longer easily manipulated. They are still kind, but no longer willing to abandon themselves. They are still understanding, but no longer willing to tolerate unhealthy behavior. They still care deeply, but they have finally learned that caring for others should never require destroying themselves. People who knew the old version may struggle to understand these changes. They may expect the same endless availability, the same endless patience, the same endless sacrifices. Instead, they encounter someone stronger, someone clearer, someone more grounded, someone who knows their value. And that transformation creates a version of the empath most people never expected to see. A version capable of creating a life based on authenticity instead of fear. A version capable of choosing growth over comfort. A version capable of protecting their peace without guilt. A version capable of trusting themselves fully. And this leads to the final truth. As we come to the end of this journey, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The old version of the empath had to end. The version that constantly searched for validation. The version that ignored personal needs. The version that carried responsibilities that never belonged to them. The version that believed endless sacrifice was the price of love. That chapter was never meant to last forever. It was preparing you for something greater. Validation lost its power because your worth was never meant to depend on someone else's approval. Boundaries became strength because protecting your peace is not selfish. Pain became wisdom because every disappointment carried a lesson hidden beneath the hurt. Self-respect replaced self-sacrifice because you finally realize that caring for yourself is just as important as caring for others. This is why the empath is not breaking. The empath is rebuilding. And rebuilding is rarely beautiful in the beginning. It looks like confusion before clarity. It looks like loneliness before connection. It looks like endings before new beginnings. It looks like letting go before moving forward. Many people only notice the comeback after it happens. They see the confidence. They see the strength. They see the peace. They see the success. They see the smile. They see the person who finally knows their value. But what they do not see are the hidden chapters. They do not see the nights when you sat alone trying to make sense of everything. They do not see the tears that never reached anyone else's eyes. They do not see the heartbreak that changed